Hello, I'm Mirenda. I'm an advocate for constructive debate. I hope to spark that down in the comment section today. I feel compelled to make a short series of videos discussing everything that's going on in the United States and around the world concerning Mr. Floyd's murder and the protests for social change. One thing that I've noticed very much, and the thing I'm going to talk to you about today, something that's been all over my news feed, are three distinct interrelated constructs. The first is systemic racism and Mr. Floyd's murder. The second is the protests surrounding Mr. Floyd's murder. And the third is the rioting and the looting that resulted from Mr. Floyd's murder. Obviously, they're all connected, but they are three distinct constructs that have to be analyzed individually. You cannot analyze them all together, and I'll tell you why. Mr. Floyd's murder is a result of systemic racism. That means the judiciary system in the United States facilitates the murder of black men and black women by police officers. Those police officers know that they can do that with impunity. Systemic racism in the United States, it's been around for hundreds of years. Even white supremacists acknowledge that there's systemic racism. They're just advocating for it to remain in place. The sun has come out. There have been other murders of black people committed by police officers in the United States that did not result in protests. Protests, they're their own thing. Protests are a distinct social issue. They are a social movement, and they're motivated by two things: what they want to change and who they want to change, like how widespread that change is. The protests that resulted from Mr. Floyd's murder are seeking to get justice and to change systemic racism in the United States. Most of the protests that are happening, they're peaceful protests, but that is not being demonstrated in the mainstream media. Local media outlets have been brilliant. They're showing that on their social media pages, doing the best they can to spread awareness of this fact. And individual activists are live streaming peaceful protests around the world. But we all have this idea that the protests are mostly violent and filled with riots. And that's a result of the mainstream media reporting it with that kind of bias, because that is patently untrue. The third thing I want to highlight are the riots and the looting. And as I mentioned earlier, social movements each have their own motivations. And this is where things get tricky, because it's not one cohesive group of people rioting and looting. It is several small groups, each trying to advance their own interests. And none of them, very, very few of them, are trying to seek justice for Mr. Floyd. There's a small group of rioters, not looters, but rioters, who are frustrated and angry, and they say, burn it all down. If this society supports the murder of black people by police officers, burn the whole society down. The vast majority of the rioters come from small groups who each have their own agendas. For instance, you have the white supremacist groups who have openly stated that they want to bring what they perceive to be a race war in the United States to a head. So they riot, they loot, they're trying to make things worse. You have anti-fascist groups who have their own agenda. And you just have some opportunists that want to start trouble. As of yet, we don't know all of the groups that have sparked off the looting and the rioting. What we do know is that these are disparate groups, all with their own aims, and we can't lump them in together with the peaceful protesters because they have different agendas. It's important that you remember that, because so many of you want to withdraw your support for the protesters due to the looters and rioters, and they are not all the same people. It is also important to note that people from all walks of life are engaging in rioting and looting and protesting. This is not just a black people issue. People are seeking social justice. They want justice for Mr. Floyd, and they want an end to systemic racism in the United States, which leaks out into other countries in various ways. I hope that this information has helped you. I hope it brings a little bit of clarity. I know that in my own mind, I've struggled with thinking about the rioting and the looting, and it has distracted me from seeking social justice for Mr. Floyd and for seeking an end to systemic racism. You need to examine your own mind. You need to have constructive conversations with people who challenge your implicit biases, and you need to seek an end to systemic racism. I think that's something on which we can all agree. I hope this helps. I'll chat to you soon. Bye.